Hello everyone, welcome to PTD Vinyl World. Today I wanted to continue the 50 years of music I had started last month with 1974 albums. So this month I'm going to go over my favorite 1975 albums. And again, this is just a list of my favorites. I'm probably sure there's many missing that you might make a note of, or I might have forgot some obvious ones as well, but I'm not going to put in there ones that I don't particularly like in general, or if it's a band I don't like, etc. But I just wanted to mention a few that I didn't have physical copies of right now. The first Rainbow album, which is just called Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow, and Jeff Beck, Blow by Blow. I used to have those on vinyl years ago, but I had gotten rid of them at some point, so I just wanted to mention those. So the first one I'm going to talk about is an album that was released actually in 1974 in the UK, but it was released in 1975 in the US, and that's Sweet Desolation Boulevard. And it actually has a different track listing. A lot of their hits were just singles in England, like Ballroom Blitz and Fox on the Run, but in the US they put it on this album actually. So their catalog is kind of weird, kind of like the early Beatles albums that you needed the singles to get all of the songs. But this album is actually really heavy. Some of the stuff is, I don't know if there was anything heavier even released at the time besides maybe like Black Sabbath, but a lot of it's like fast and heavy too, like Sweet FA, Set Me Free, AC/DC. So if you're a rock fan and haven't heard this whole album, everyone's heard Ballroom Blitz and Fox on the Run. Definitely need to get this. They only put out a few albums that were really like hard rock. After that, they got into more pop, and I think the few, even like their first few albums were more pop oriented as well, but definitely have to get that one. Next up is Rush, Fly By Night. It's their second album. Probably Anthem and Fly By Night are the best known songs on here. First one with Neil Peart on drums. So just starting to get into that progressive sound a little bit on this. Beneath, Between, Behind, By Tour, and The Snow Dog. Some pretty well-known songs on here. Next up is Queen, Night at the Opera. Best known, obviously, for Bohemian Rhapsody. But my favorite song on here is probably Death on Two Legs. I'm in Love with My Cars, pretty cool song, sung by Roger Taylor. Prophet Song is like another big epic long song that no one really mentions anymore. And Love of My Life is a big concert favorite. It's not one of my top favorite Queen albums, but it's still sort of a must-have. Next up is Styx, Equinox. I think this is the last album before Tommy Shaw joined, so it sort of has sound like sort of proggy like their earlier albums, but also getting into more of the melodic arena sound like Lorelei and Sweet Madam Blues. Probably the two big songs on this album, but the whole album is pretty good start to finish. A lot of people don't remember Styx as being very heavy, but a lot of their earlier catalog is. Next up is Tommy Bolin, Teaser. He's best known as replacing Ritchie Blackmore in Rainbow on Come Taste the Band, but he did have a couple solo albums in the 70s. This one, I forgot the name of the other one, and he did play with the James Gang, I believe, before Deep Purple, and some jazz fusion stuff. But this one's pretty good. It's like half instrumental, half songs have vocals. But yeah, this is pretty good if you ever see that. The first Angel album. This one is probably their... a lot of people say it's proggy. Besides The Tower, I don't really think it's that proggy. Mariner maybe is pretty proggy also, but it's probably their heaviest one. And Tower Rock and Rollers is probably the two big songs and the Angel theme. They were also on Casablanca and managed by Bill Aucoin, who managed Kiss. Next up, the Who by Numbers. Sort of like their first regular album of just a collection of songs since before Tommy, because they had just been doing concept stuff. I mean, Who's Next, I guess, is not really a concept album, but I think this is their most underrated album. It's got a couple of my favorite songs, Slip Kid, Dreaming from the Waist. I think How Many Friends is a song that no one talks about from them. It should have been one of their more well-known, bigger songs. A lot of people say this is probably their last, like, great album, but I don't know. Who Are You is pretty good also. I like some of the later ones too, but it's pretty good. Debut Ted Nugent album. I think I ranked this number one when I ranked his albums. Stranglehold's the big song on here. Just What the Doctor Ordered. Motor City Man. I think, like, you could probably say this is his best 70s studio album. I don't think any of them are, like, produced that well as far as sound quality, but the guitar playing and everything's great. Two Kiss albums in 75, Dressed to Kill. I've never, like, thought this was that great of a studio album. For some reason, in the last, like, 10, 15 years, people have, especially Kiss fans, have said, like, this is one of their favorites. But it's a short album, just over 30 minutes, and a couple songs that they had to sort of redo from the Wicked Lester days. And, like, Lover All I Can, I think, was from Wicked Lester, and so is She. But obviously, she's much better on here. Couple other songs that I don't think Room Service or Op Got 'Em are two their favorites. Of course, Rock and Roll All Night, the studio version's on here. And then they released Kiss Alive, one of the best, if not the best live albums of all time. Rock and Roll All Night, this live version was the actual hit as opposed to the studio version. But I think overall, I would say I prefer the versions on here than the studio albums of the first three. Deuce and Strutter, Black Diamond, 100,000 Years has that long Peter Criss drum solo. And the sound is just, like, really like you're in the arena. Even though they say a lot of this was re-recorded, mostly except the drums, but who knows. And the guitars sound pretty live, because if you listen to bootlegs or watch videos from them at this point, they didn't sound as tight as they do on this album. Pink Floyd, Wish You Were Here. I'm not the biggest Pink Floyd fan, but I do like this album a lot. Shine On You Crazy Diamond, all the different parts are on here. Welcome to the Machine, Have a Cigar, and Wish You Were Here. Pretty much every song on here is played on classic rock radio at some point. Not sure if I like this or Dark Side of the Moon better, but this is definitely one of their best. Bruce Springsteen, Born to Run. I don't think this is as good as everybody says it is. Like, there is Thunder Road, 10th Avenue Freeze Out, Born to Run, She's the One. The rest of it is actually kind of boring. I'm not big on his piano ballads. I think, especially when he's got multiple ones on one album. And I never thought his 70s stuff was really that produced too well sound-wise until he got to, like, Darkness on the Edge of Town. But I guess you could say this was his first big album that got him into the mainstream. So. And Fleetwood Mac self-titled. This is the first one where Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks joined, so it was almost like a new band. A lot of big hits on here. Monday Morning, Rhiannon, Over My Head. Crystal is from the Buckingham Nicks album, if you have that redone. Say You Love Me is on here. I think World Turning was also sort of a hit, and Landslide as well. So, that Robin Trower from Earth Below, or For Earth Below. Nobody talks about him anymore, but he was sort of a big guitar hero in the 70s. Had a real Hendrixy sound. He used that same univibe thing, effects that he did, but had a different vocalist. His name was James Dewar, so he's sort of identifiable as the sound of Robin Trower. He was his vocalist until the early 80s, I believe. But this one's pretty solid album, just like all of his 70s, early 80s albums are. Next up, a band maybe you don't ever heard of is called Trooper. They're a Canadian rock band produced by Randy Bachman. This is the only one that I think is like real heavy, as far as I know. I don't have all their albums, I only have a few. They actually almost, by the later 70s, almost became new wave / pop. They had a couple of hits in England. I don't know how big or popular they were in the US, but this one's real heavy, real proto, almost like proto metal, but this is already 1975, so sounds like it's from the early 70s, like Blue Cheer or something like that, but it's pretty good. Blue Oyster Cult released this live album, On Your Feet or On Your Knees. Awesome cover and title. Just like Kiss, I don't think their first 3 albums had the production or sound quality of them the way they sounded live, but this live album doesn't sound that great either, but still a lot of these songs are much better live than the studio versions, and they also do a version of Born to Be Wild on here. I think this was possibly their first gold album, but I'm not positive. I have to look that up. Led Zeppelin, Physical Graffiti. This was I believe my highest ranked Led Zeppelin album when I did their ranking. I think it's the one that really sounds like the big overblown Led Zeppelin sound on some of the songs. There's also a lot of acoustic stuff on here. This album was recorded during different years. Different tracks were recorded here and there, so sort of a conglomerate, but it all flows pretty well as one long double album. Some say it's probably the last great album, but yeah, I would probably say that. The others are okay after this. Frank Zappa, Bongo Fury. This is a live album with Captain Beefheart on vocals on some tracks. It's live, but it's all sort of new tracks, which a lot of Frank Zappa's albums were. The big song on here is probably Muffin Man. The solo to that is just like unbelievable if you're a guitar player. Carolina Hardcore Ecstasy is another big song on here, but overall it's a pretty good listen. I think this is Terry Bozzio's first album with him as well, and also released, I think this is my favorite Frank Zappa album, One Size Fits All. Sort of like my favorite era of his period. So it has, of course, Inca Roads, the 2 Sofa songs, San Bernardino and Andy. Paul McCartney and Wings, Venus and Mars. One of their better albums, I think. I think a lot of their stuff's kind of overrated, but Venus and Mars, Rock Show, Letting Go, Magneto and Titanium Man. Listen to What the Man Said, I think was a big hit. Half these albums, though, are just like not even rock. They're just like stupid, almost piano or like old time songs. I wish he hadn't done a lot of that stuff. But this one is a lot better than the others, I think. The Kinks also released 2 albums in 1975. So when you're going through this, you don't realize that some of these albums came out the same year, but the first one was Soap Opera. This was in the middle of their sort of rock opera era. And this one's pretty good compared to the one that came before this, Preservation Act 2. I didn't like that one at all, really. But there's some songs on here that could be pulled out as standalone songs rather than part of a story. But it's pretty good. Then next, at the later in the year, Schoolboys in Disgrace, sort of a concept album of them in private school. Probably the most rock sounding of all their 70s concept stuff. This was sort of like, this was their last RCA album before they went to Arista and became sort of more of an arena sounding band. Best known song on here is probably The Hard Way, which was on One for the Road, and some other bands have covered it. But overall, this is a pretty good. A lot of the songs sound like 50 style rock and roll, Chuck Berry type songs, because I guess that's when they went to school and stuff. But it's a pretty good listen for that. ZZ Top Fandango. This is half live, half studio. The live stuff is pretty good. Sounds really good, like you're right there. And of course, the two big songs on here are Heard It on the X and Tush. They sound great. The 70s ZZ Top, some of it's actually really heavy. They're known as this sort of Texas blues band, and in the 80s had that sort of processed drum and guitar sound. But like the 70s stuff is really pretty heavy. I mean, they're not just like a Texas blues band. They actually are pretty heavy. So that the Frampton album from Peter Frampton is the one that came out before Frampton Comes Alive, and it has a lot of the studio versions of the big hits on there. Show Me the Way and Baby I Love Your Way. I'll Give You Money is a pretty good song. And what's the other hit on here? Penny for Your Thoughts, maybe. But I like, just like some of the other live albums, the better versions are on Frampton Comes Alive, although this is still pretty good. Yeah. Bad Company, Straight Shooter. I'm not a huge Bad Company fan, but this has a lot of their big hits on it. Good Love and Go Bad, Feel Like Making Love, Shooting Star, Deal with the Preacher. Pretty heavy and really good sounding album. Produced by Ron Nevison. He actually did Physical Graffiti, or at least a lot of it. And then I got a couple left here. Yesterday's from Yes. This was a sort of a compilation of their tracks on their first two albums before Steve Howe joined. I think it might have even a couple of other singles or B-sides, and it also has the song America, which was newly recorded, and I think this is the album it was on. It wasn't on any of their studio albums, so cool cover art though. And then last but not least is Alice Cooper, Welcome to My Nightmare, his first solo album that wasn't the Alice Cooper band. This was one of my favorite albums from him. It used to be my favorite, but now I rank it below some of the earlier ones. But of course, the title track, Devil's Food, Black Widow, Escape is sort of a sleeper on this album, Department of Youth, and then the whole Stephen Awakening thing on the second side. So it is sort of like one of the few concept albums he actually made throughout his career. So anyway, that was my list. Let me know if I missed any obvious ones. Obviously, in the past, I've said I'm not going to include any like stuff I don't like Crosby, Stills, and Nash or whatever, But if you have any you want to add, give me your 5 or 10. And if you like these videos, please subscribe, and I'll talk to you later. Thanks.